I'm Dudley, 34 years old, and my relationship with my parents has always been complicated. They measured love in dollar signs and social status, not in hugs or support. When I got married to the love of my life, they couldn't be bothered to show up. But the moment a photo of my $140,000 Tesla appeared on Facebook, my phone lit up with my mother's name. Her voice was sugary sweet. "Where did you get that kind of money? We're having a family meeting tomorrow." Little did they know I had a surprise plan waiting. Before I tell you how I handled my parents' sudden interest in my life, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with family members who only value you for what you have, not who you are. Growing up in Highland Park, an affluent suburb north of Chicago, my childhood looked perfect on paper. Our 4-bedroom colonial house with its manicured lawn and 3-car garage was the envy of many. My father, Richard, was a corporate attorney who represented major pharmaceutical companies, while my mother, Elaine, sold luxury real estate to the nouveau rich of Chicago. They drove the right cars, wore the right clothes, and made sure we vacationed in the right places. But behind our front door, life revolved around a different currency, achievement and status. Dinner conversations centered on my father's latest big client or my mother's record-breaking property sale. Their faces would light up discussing these victories, but that same enthusiasm never appeared when I showed them my artwork or talked about books I was reading. "The Anderson boy just got accepted to Princeton," my mother would say casually over breakfast, her eyes fixed on me rather than her coffee. "And he plays 3 sports. Colleges look for well-rounded students, Dudley." The comparison was never subtle. My father was more direct. "Art is a hobby, not a career," he told me when I was 12, and showed him a painting my teacher had praised. "Unless you're Picasso, and trust me, you're not Picasso." He laughed and ruffled my hair as though he'd said something supportive rather than crushing. Christmas and birthdays were particularly revealing. My parents gave generous gifts, but they were always things they wanted me to have. Prep school, clothing, tennis equipment, SAT, prep books. When I unwrapped a chemistry set instead of the art supplies I'd asked for on my 13th birthday, I learned to hide my disappointment. "This will help you get into a good college," my mother explained, mistaking my silence for gratitude. "Science is where the future is." My younger sister, Amanda, fared better in this environment. 3 years my junior, she intuitively understood the family currency and traded in it expertly. She joined debate club, played tennis, and brought home perfect report cards. Her achievements earned her warm smiles and praise at the dinner table, while my above-average grades and exceptional art portfolio garnered only concerned glances. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became a refrain I heard regularly by the time I entered high school. We lived in a social circle where families competed through their children. The Miller's son got a perfect SAT score. The Johnson's daughter was class president and headed to Yale. Every accomplishment by someone else's child felt like an indictment of my own inadequacy in my parents' eyes. My room became my sanctuary. There I could create art without judgment, listen to music my parents deemed lacking in sophistication, and dream about a future where I defined success on my own terms. I covered my walls with prints of works by Basquiat, Warhol, and Kahlo, artists who broke rules and defined new visual languages. My parents never entered my room without knocking, so this small act of rebellion went largely unnoticed. The summer before my senior year, I landed an internship at a local graphic design studio. I didn't tell my parents until after I'd accepted it, knowing they would disapprove and push me towards something more practical like a law firm or bank. When I finally broke the news, my father's response was predictable. "That's fine for the summer," he said dismissively, "but remember, you'll need real internships for your resume next year." By real, he meant finance, law, medicine, or anything with a reliable 6-figure income attached to it. I nodded and said nothing, having learned long ago that arguing only extended these uncomfortable conversations. We attended charity galas and country club events where my parents paraded Amanda and me as extensions of their success. "Dudley is considering pre-law," my mother would tell her friends, though I had expressed no such interest. I became adept at polite smiles and vague answers about my future. Our family photos told a story of perfection, coordinated outfits, bright smiles, vacation snapshots from Martha's Vineyard in Aspen. What they didn't show were the arguments before each photo about my hair being too long or my posture not conveying enough confidence. They didn't capture my mother's whispered "stand up straight" or my father's smile like "you mean it, son." I had material comfort, but emotional poverty. My parents provided everything I needed except the one thing I truly wanted: acceptance for who I actually was. They loved the idea of me, the potential of me, but not the reality of me. By 18, I felt like a stranger in my own home, counting the days until I could leave for college and begin building an authentic life. When college acceptance letters arrived, spring of my senior year, the tension that had been simmering beneath our family's polished surface finally boiled over. I had applied to several business schools as my parents wanted, but also to 3 art schools, including the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design. When the RISD acceptance letter arrived, I felt a thrill of validation I rarely experienced at home. I got into RISD, I announced at dinner that night, unable to hide my excitement. One of the best art schools in the country. My parents exchanged a look I'd seen countless times before. Disappointment, poorly disguised as concern. "That's interesting," my father said slowly. "But you also got into Northwestern's business program. That's where you'll be going, of course." It wasn't a question. It never had been. "I'm going to RISD," I replied, surprising myself with my steadiness. "I've already accepted their offer." What followed was 3 weeks of Cold War in our house. My father threatened to withhold tuition unless I came to my senses. My mother tried a gentler approach, leaving brochures about starving artists and business school success statistics on my bed. Amanda watched from the sidelines, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and admiration at my defiance. Eventually, my parents realized I wouldn't budge. My father called me into his study one evening in late April. "We'll pay half," he said without preamble. "Half your tuition, the rest is on you. Maybe working to pay for this. Choice. We'll teach you something about the real world." It was meant as a punishment, but as I packed for Providence that August, it felt like freedom. RISD was everything I had hoped for, and more challenging than I had imagined. While my classmates complained about critiques and deadlines, I thrived under the pressure of professors who pushed me creatively, rather than trying to redirect my passions. For the first time, my natural abilities were assets, not liabilities. To cover my share of tuition and living expenses, I worked 20 hours a week at a coffee shop near campus and took freelance design jobs whenever I could find them. Some nights I worked until 3 in the morning, balancing paid projects with school assignments. I learned to survive on ramen and coffee, wearing thrift store clothes, while my classmates sported designer labels. During my sophomore year, I met Professor Jackson, a graphic design instructor who would become my mentor. After class one day, he held me back to discuss my portfolio. "You have a unique perspective, Dudley," he said, flipping through my work, "but you're playing it safe. I want to see you take bigger risks." Unlike my parents' critiques, his felt constructive rather than diminishing. Over the next few years, Professor Jackson pushed me to develop my voice while teaching me the business side of design. He helped me secure better-paying freelance work and introduced me to his industry contacts. "Talent means nothing without hustle," he told me often, "and you have both." By junior year, I was earning enough from design work to quit the coffee shop. I built a modest client list and saved every penny I could. My parents called monthly, their conversations focused on grades and whether I was being practical about my future. I kept these calls brief and never mentioned my growing success as a designer. During winter break of my senior year, I declined the trip to my parents' timeshare in Vail, choosing instead to stay in Providence and work on my final portfolio. This decision widened the growing rift between us, but it also resulted in my first major client, a local brewery that needed rebranding. The project paid $6,000 more money than I'd ever seen at once. When I graduated, my parents attended the ceremony, their expressions a mixture of resignation and confusion as they watched me receive departmental honors. At dinner afterward, my father asked what my backup plan was. "This is the plan," I told him. "I already have clients and projects lined up." He nodded and changed the subject to Amanda's pre-med program. With my degree in hand and a growing portfolio, I made another decision that baffled my parents. Instead of returning to Chicago, or heading to New York as many of my classmates did I move to Seattle. The tech boom was creating opportunities for designers, and the distance from my family felt necessary for my continued growth. My first Seattle apartment was a studio barely big enough for a bed and a desk. I printed business cards and built a website officially launching Dudley Design Studio. The first 6 months were lean and difficult. I took any project I could find, from wedding invitations to logo designs for startups that paid in promises rather than cash. There were nights I questioned my choices, staring at my dwindling bank account and wondering if my parents had been right all along. But gradually, through word of mouth and persistent networking, better projects came. A small software company hired me to redesign their user interface. A local restaurant commissioned menu designs and branding materials. Each successful project led to referrals and larger opportunities. By the end of my first year in Seattle, I had moved to a larger apartment and hired a part-time assistant. By the end of my second year, I had an actual office space and was turning down more projects than I accepted. I developed a distinctive style that blended digital minimalism with hand-drawn elements. An approach that particularly appealed to tech companies wanting to appear more human and approachable. My parents remained skeptical of my career choice, despite evidence of my success. When I mentioned a major contract with a recognizable tech brand during a phone call, my mother responded by telling me about a family friend's son who had just made partner at his law firm. I learned to share less and less about my professional life with them. After 3 years in Seattle, Dudley Design Studio had grown into a boutique agency with 6 employees and a roster of impressive clients. I had proven to myself that I could succeed on my own terms. What I didn't realize then was that I was still defining success through my parents' lens, measuring my worth through achievement and financial milestones rather than personal fulfillment. It would take meeting Sarah to help me understand the difference. I met Sarah on a rainy October evening at a charity art auction benefiting Seattle Children's Hospital. My company had donated design services, and I attended more out of obligation than interest. Across the gallery, I noticed a woman with auburn hair examining one of the paintings with unusual intensity. While other attendees circulated with champagne flutes, networking and glancing at artwork, she stood completely absorbed in a large abstract canvas. Curious, I approached and stood beside her. "What do you see in it?" I asked after a moment. She turned to me with a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "Hope," she said simply. "It reminds me of sunrise through a hospital window." It was an oddly specific interpretation, and I told her so. "I'm a pediatric nurse," she explained. "I've seen a lot of sunrises through hospital windows. They always bring promise of a new day, even in difficult circumstances." That was Sarah, finding beauty and meaning in places most people wouldn't think to look. We talked for 2 hours that night, ignoring the auction until they practically turned the lights off around us. She told me about growing up in a small town in Oregon, the middle child of 5 siblings with parents who ran a bookstore and encouraged imagination above all else. Her childhood sounded like something from a novel. Family dinner discussions about books they were reading, weekend camping trips, and holiday traditions that had nothing to do with impressing neighbors. "My dad built us a treehouse when I was 7, she told me over coffee on our 3rd date. "Nothing fancy, just boards and nails, but we thought it was a palace. We spent entire summers up there reading and making up stories." I found myself telling her about my own childhood, something I rarely discussed with anyone. Rather than offering pity or judgment, she listened with genuine curiosity. "They must be very driven people," she said of my parents, finding a generous interpretation I had never considered. "It sounds like they equate financial success with safety and love." "I never thought of it that way," I admitted. Dating Sarah was unlike any relationship I'd experienced before. She approached life with an openness and authenticity that was both refreshing and initially uncomfortable for someone raised in my family's atmosphere of constant performance. When I picked her up for dinner directly from her shift at the hospital, she never apologized for her scrubs or tired eyes. When I showed her early versions of design projects, she gave honest feedback without worrying if it might upset me. "My family believes in saying what you mean," she explained when I commented on her directness. "Otherwise, how will people know where they stand with you?" Sarah's family was as warm in reality as they sounded in her stories. 6 months into our relationship, we flew to Oregon for her youngest brother's high school graduation. Her parents, Jack and Margaret, welcomed me with genuine interest, rather than the evaluative scrutiny I was accustomed to. They asked about my work because they wanted to understand my passion, not to assess my earning potential. During that weekend, I witnessed family dynamics so different from my own that they seemed almost fictional. Siblings teased each other but stepped up instantly if one needed help. Achievements were celebrated, but so were efforts and kindnesses. No one kept score or made comparisons. "You look surprised," Sarah commented after dinner our first night there, when her family had spent an hour helping her brother plan his gap-year backpacking trip, something my parents would have considered a wasteful detour. I admitted. They actually want him to explore and find himself. My parents would see that as a failure to launch. Sarah's relationship with her family showed me what I had missed growing up and helped heal wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged. Through her eyes, I began to see that my parents' conditional approval was their limitation, not mine. After a year together, we decided to move into a charming craftsman bungalow in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood. It needed work, but we spent weekends painting walls and refinishing hardwood floors, turning it into a home that reflected both of us. Sarah filled it with books and plants, while I created gallery walls with artwork from local artists we admired. "This is the first place that's ever really felt like home," I told her one evening as we sat on our porch swing. She looked at me with those perceptive eyes of hers. "Because it's filled with acceptance, not expectations." 2 years after we met on a hiking trip to Olympic National Park, I asked Sarah to marry me at sunset on Ruby Beach. I had carried my grandmother's resized ring in my backpack all day, waiting for the perfect moment. "Are you sure?" she asked after saying yes, tears in her eyes. "Your family might make things complicated." "You're my family now," I told her. "You and whoever else we choose to let into our circle." Wedding planning brought the inevitable conversation about my parents. Sarah's family was thrilled and immediately jumped into helping with arrangements, but I had been putting off telling Richard and Elaine. "They should have a chance to be there," Sarah encouraged. "Whatever happens is their choice, not yours." I called them on a Sunday evening, steeling myself for their reaction. My mother answered with her usual distracted greeting. "Dudley, what a surprise. We were just discussing Amanda's medical school graduation plans." I shared our engagement news, trying to sound casual despite my nervousness. "Married well, isn't that?" "Sudden," my mother replied after a pause. "What does she do again?" "A nurse, was it?" "A pediatric oncology nurse," I corrected, already feeling defensive. "And we've been together for over 2 years. Well, congratulations, I suppose. Your father will want to know about her family. Anyone we might know?" The conversation continued in this vein, with questions about Sarah's background that felt more like a vetting process than genuine interest. When I mentioned our planned wedding date 6 months away, my mother made a non-committal noise. "We'll have to check our calendars. That's our charity gala season, you know. But we'll certainly try to make it work." My father got on the phone briefly to offer congratulations that sounded more like condolences, and to ask if I'd considered a prenuptial agreement given your business assets. I ended the call feeling drained and sad, but not surprised. "They'll either show up or they won't," Sarah said, holding me close afterward. "Either way, we'll have a beautiful day surrounded by people who truly celebrate us." As our wedding date approached, my parents remained lukewarm about attending. They declined our invitation to the engagement party Sarah's parents hosted, citing a conference in San Diego. They showed no interest in meeting Sarah's family before the wedding. Each interaction left me with a familiar hollow feeling I had hoped to outgrow. Sarah, meanwhile, threw herself into creating a wedding that reflected us as a couple. We chose a small venue overlooking Puget Sound, planned a menu featuring local cuisine, and selected music that told our story. Her parents flew out multiple times to help with arrangements, her mother and Sarah spending long weekends looking at flowers and tasting cakes. These moments highlighted the stark contrast between our family's approaches to major life events. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made a final attempt to connect with my parents, sending photos of the venue and details about accommodations. "Looking forward to seeing you both," I wrote, still clinging to hope despite everything. The text message came 3 days before our wedding, while Sarah and I were finalizing seating arrangements in our dining room. My phone buzzed and I felt a familiar tightness in my chest when I saw my mother's name on the screen. "Dudley, something's come up. Your father has an opportunity to meet with potential major clients in New York this weekend. We won't be able to make it to the wedding after all. I'm sure you understand that this is too important to miss. We'll send a gift. Love, Mom." I stared at the screen, reading the message twice before showing it to Sarah. Her eyes flashed with anger before softening with concern for me. "I'm so sorry, Dudley," she said, taking my hand. "Are you okay?" The truth was, I had been expecting this. Part of me had known from the moment I announced our engagement that my parents wouldn't show up for one of the most important days of my life. Still, the confirmation stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. "I'm fine," I said automatically, then corrected myself. "Actually, no, I'm not fine. I'm hurt and angry, but I'm also relieved in a way. At least now we know." Sarah's parents arrived the next day, bringing with them the boundless warmth and support I had come to treasure. When Margaret, Sarah's mother, learned my parents weren't coming, she hugged me tight. "Their loss," she said simply. "We couldn't be happier to welcome you to our family." Sarah's father, Jack, was more direct. "Son, I don't pretend to understand your parents' choice, but I want you to know that I'm proud to stand up with you on Saturday. If you'd like me to walk with you during the processional, I'd be honored." His offer brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed. "That would mean a lot." The day before our wedding, my best friend Jason arrived from Boston. We had met at RISD and stayed close despite the distance, talking weekly and visiting whenever possible. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "They bailed, didn't they?" he asked as we picked up our suits from the tailor. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Predictable," he said, shaking his head. "But listen to me, Dudley. Tomorrow isn't about who isn't there. It's about who is there. Sarah, who loves you exactly as you are, and all the people who've shown up for you both." The morning of our wedding dawned clear and beautiful, rare for Seattle in October. From the window of the rental house where I was getting ready with Jason and Sarah's brothers, I could see the Olympic Mountains across the Sound, their peaks bright with early snow. "Perfect day to start the rest of your life," Jason said, adjusting my tie. "Ready?" I was. Despite the empty seats where my parents should have been, our ceremony was everything we had hoped for. Sarah walked down the aisle with both her parents, radiant in a simple gown that caught the light like water. When Jack joined me at the front before the processional began, giving my shoulder a supportive squeeze, I felt a father's love that had nothing to do with DNA. We wrote our own vows, promising to choose each other daily, to create a home built on acceptance and growth, to be each other's safe harbor. As I spoke the words, I realized I was not only committing to Sarah, but also to a different kind of life than the one I was raised to value. At the reception, Jason's best man speech acknowledged the elephant in the room with grace and humor. "Some of you might have noticed a few empty seats today," he began. "But what I see is a room absolutely full of love. Dudley, you've always had an eye for design, but your greatest creation is the life you've built on your own terms. Sarah, thank you for seeing the masterpiece in my friend that some people missed." We danced, ate, and celebrated, surrounded by people who chose to be there. Sarah's extended family adopted me instantly, her uncles sharing jokes and her aunts insisting I call them for recipes. My small circle of friends from college and Seattle mixed easily with Sarah's larger network, creating new connections that would enrich our lives going forward. Late in the evening, as the celebration continued, Sarah found me taking a moment alone on the venue's balcony. "No regrets?" she asked, slipping her arm through mine. "Not one," I said honestly. "This day was perfect because you were here and because we're surrounded by people who love us authentically." We left 2 days later for our honeymoon in Bali, spending 2 weeks in a world so removed from our daily lives that it allowed new perspective. Walking on volcanic beaches and exploring ancient temples, I found myself letting go of the disappointment about my parents' absence. "I think I've been holding on to a version of them that doesn't exist," I told Sarah one evening as we watched the sunset from our bungalow. "The parents who would be proud of me just for being me, who would choose my wedding over a business meeting. They're just not who Richard and Elaine are." That's a painful realization, Sarah said, but also a freeing one, isn't it? She was right. Accepting my parents for who they actually were, not who I wished they could be, lifted a weight I had carried for years. I returned from our honeymoon with a newfound peace and focus on the future we were building together. 2 years passed quickly as Sarah and I settled into married life. My design agency continued to grow, expanding to 12 employees and moving to a larger office space in downtown Seattle. We specialized in branding and user experience design for tech companies, and our reputation for innovative work spread beyond the Pacific Northwest. One Monday morning in February, my assistant knocked on my office door with unusual excitement. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Blake Henderson from Neuralink. He doesn't have an appointment, but you might want to make time." Neuralink was a rising star in the artificial intelligence sector, known for their groundbreaking natural language processing tools. I had followed their progress in tech publications but never imagined them seeking out our relatively small agency. Blake, their 30-something CEO with rumpled clothes and intense energy, got straight to the point. "We're preparing for a major product launch and rebranding," he explained. "We've looked at every design firm in Seattle, San Francisco, and New York. Your work for Cascade Tech last year convinced us you're the right team." The project he outlined was massive. Complete brand overhaul interface, redesign marketing materials, and conference presence for their upcoming flagship product. The timeline was tight, just 4 months, but the budget was generous. Too generous. "That figure seems high," I said when he mentioned the compensation. Blake smiled. "Half cash, half stock options. We're 6 months from IPO. Those options could be worth nothing, or they could be worth a lot more than the cash. It's a gamble, but one I think you might want to take." After consulting with Sarah and my financial advisor, I accepted the terms. The next 4 months were the most intense of my professional life. Our team worked nights and weekends collaborating closely with Neuralink's developers. The design challenges were complex and fascinating, pushing our creativity to new levels. "You look exhausted but happier than I've ever seen you," Sarah commented one night as I finally came home around 11. "This project feels different," I explained. "They're not just clients, they've become partners. What we're creating together could change how people interact with technology." The Neuralink launch was a resounding success. Their product received rave reviews, and our design work was highlighted in technology publications. Blake sent a champagne delivery to our office with a note, "Just the beginning. Watch your stock options." He wasn't exaggerating. 7 months later, Neuralink went public with an opening stock price triple their initial estimate. Overnight, my stock options were worth over $4 million, with restrictions on selling that would gradually lift over the next 3 years. When my financial advisor called to confirm the numbers, I sat in stunned silence. "Dudley, are you still there?" she asked. "Yes," I managed. "I'm just processing." "Well, process quickly," she advised. "We need to talk about tax implications and investment strategies. This is life-changing money if managed properly." That evening I walked home instead of taking my usual bus, needing time to think before sharing the news with Sarah. We lived comfortably but modestly. Our mortgage was reasonable. We took 1 vacation a year, and while we never worried about bills, we were far from wealthy. This sudden financial windfall would change everything, or nothing, depending on the choices we made. Sarah was working the late shift at the hospital, so I had the house to myself. I sat on our porch, swing the same one where we had spent countless evenings talking about our days and dreams. The neighborhood hadn't changed. Children still played in nearby yards. Neighbors walked dogs and waved as they passed. Our life here was good, built on values and relationships rather than possessions or status. When Sarah arrived home around midnight, I was waiting with 2 glasses of wine. "Special occasion," she asked, kicking off her shoes. "Neuralink went public today," I said. "The stock options. They're worth $4 million. Her eyes widened. Million with an M. I nodded. "Wow," she breathed, sitting beside me. Then after a moment, "Are you okay? You look overwhelmed." "I am," I admitted. "Part of me feels like I should be ecstatic, but mostly I feel strange, like I've stumbled into someone else's life. Sarah took my hand. It's still our life. Money doesn't change who we are or what matters to us. Over the following weeks, we had many conversations about how to approach this unexpected wealth. We consulted financial planners and tax specialists, setting up investment accounts and trusts. We decided on 3 principles: security, giving back, and maintaining our values. No sudden lifestyle inflation, Sarah insisted. No mansion, no yacht, no private jet. I laughed. Definitely no yacht, but maybe one splurge. That splurge became the Tesla, a Model S Plaid that I had admired for years but never seriously considered purchasing. It was extravagant at $140,000, but after setting aside money for taxes, investments, and charitable foundations, it felt like a reasonable celebration of success. It's not just about the car, I explained to Sarah as we customized the order online. It represents everything we've worked for: innovation, sustainability, looking forward rather than back. Sarah understood. Plus, she added with a smile, "You're a designer. Aesthetics matter to you, and this car is basically art on wheels." We kept most details of our financial situation private. My employees knew the Neuralink project had been successful, but not the extent of my personal windfall. Our friends noticed the new car, but assumed the design agency was simply doing well. We made anonymous donations to causes we cared about, including the children's hospital where Sarah worked. 3 months after the IPO, Sarah shared news that put everything else in perspective. "I'm pregnant," she said one Sunday morning, her eyes shining. "Due in November." Nothing, not professional success, not financial security, compared to the joy of that moment. We held each other in our sunlit kitchen, making plans and sharing dreams for our family's future. "This child will never question if they're enough," I promised. "They'll be loved for exactly who they are." Sarah squeezed my hand. With us as parents, how could they doubt it? We agreed not to share the pregnancy news widely until the 2nd trimester. Sarah continued working her regular shifts, and I focused on managing the agency's growing client roster. Life continued much as before, with the quiet knowledge of the changes ahead, adding sweetness to ordinary days. It was Sarah who inadvertently set off the chain of events that would bring my parents back into our lives. One sunny afternoon in May, she took a photo of me washing the Tesla in our driveway, water droplets catching the light on its sleek blue surface. "My handsome husband with his baby," she captioned it teasingly on Facebook, tagging me. Neither of us thought much about the post. Sarah rarely shared on social media, and my own accounts were primarily professional. We had no idea the storm that simple photo would create. Sarah's Facebook post was nothing extraordinary, just a casual weekend moment between a husband and wife. In the photo, I was smiling over my shoulder at the camera, garden hose in hand, the Tesla gleaming in our driveway. The lighting was perfect, catching the car's distinctive lines and making the water droplets sparkle like diamonds. "My handsome husband with his baby. Weekend vibes, dream car," Sarah had written, adding a heart emoji. Our friends responded with good-natured teasing and admiring comments about the car. Sarah's co-workers from the hospital joked about her becoming a Tesla wife. My employees added playful comments about the boss finally spending some of his hard-earned money. It was light, inconsequential social media interaction. Then the post began to spread beyond our immediate circle. A friend of Sarah's shared it to a Tesla enthusiasts group she belonged to, appreciating the photographic quality more than anything else. From there, it gained traction among electric vehicle enthusiasts, eventually collecting hundreds of likes and comments from strangers admiring the car. "Did you see your photo went mini viral in Tesla circles?" my creative director mentioned during our Monday morning meeting. Sarah's got a good eye for composition. I hadn't noticed. I rarely checked social media outside of maintaining our company profiles. "That's funny," I said, making a mental note to look later. That evening at home, Sarah and I scrolled through the unexpected attention her casual photo had received. "Look at all these comments from Tesla people," she laughed. "You're their new poster boy." "Great," I groaned good-naturedly. "Just what I need." Strangers analyzing my car washing technique. We thought nothing more of it until my phone rang at 9:30 that night. I was in my home office reviewing design proposals while Sarah read a novel in our bedroom. Seeing my mother's name on the caller ID gave me pause. We hadn't spoken in over 6 months, not since a brief, awkward Christmas call. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Dudley." My mother's voice had that artificial warmth I knew well, the tone she used when wanting something. "It's been too long. How are you?" "I'm fine, Mom. Is everything okay? You don't usually call on weeknights." She laughed lightly. "Can't a mother check on her son without a reason? Though actually I did see something interesting today. Margaret Wilson. You remember her from the club. Her daughter is friends with your Sarah on that Facebook thing. She showed me a photo of you with a rather expensive-looking car." My guard went up immediately. "Yes, we bought a Tesla a few months ago." "A Tesla," she repeated as though testing the word. "Those are quite costly, aren't they? Your father mentioned they run well over $100,000 for the high-end models." "The Plaid is $140," I said, deliberately casual. "It's a splurge, but we're doing well." There was a pause before she continued, her voice shifting to a more direct tone. "Dudley, where exactly did you get that kind of money? Your father and I were concerned. That little design business of yours couldn't possibly generate that level of income. Is there something you haven't told us?" The implication was clear and insulting. "My little design business is a successful agency with major tech clients," I replied, keeping my voice level despite rising anger. "And yes, it absolutely can generate that level of income." "Well," she said, clearly not believing me, "your father wondered if perhaps you'd received some inheritance we should know about. From your grandmother, perhaps." "No, Mom. No inheritance, no lottery win, no illegal activities, if that's your next question. Just hard work and a good investment." Another pause. "Investment? What investment?" I realized I'd said more than intended and backtracked. Just business decisions that paid off. "Listen, is there something specific you needed tonight?" Her tone shifted again, becoming briskly efficient. "Yes, actually. Your father and I would like to have a family meeting. Tomorrow evening at 6 at our house. Amanda will be there too." "A family meeting about what?" "About catching up, of course. It's been far too long since we've all been together. And perhaps you could bring Sarah. We barely know her after all." The sudden interest in meeting my wife of nearly 3 years was as transparent as it was infuriating. "Mom, we live in Seattle. We can't just pop over for dinner on a day's notice." "Oh, I assumed from the photo that you were visiting Chicago." "Well, whenever you're next in town then. Though do let us know soon when that might be. Your father is quite eager to reconnect." I ended the call shortly after, my mind racing. When I joined Sarah in our bedroom, she took one look at my face and set her book aside. "What happened?" I explained the call, watching her expression shift from surprise to understanding to indignation. "Let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "They couldn't be bothered to attend our wedding or meet me for 3 years, but now that they think you have money, they're organizing family meetings." "That's about the size of it," I confirmed. "My mother actually suggested we fly to Chicago tomorrow for dinner." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "What are you thinking?" I sat beside her on our bed, thoughts crystallizing as I spoke. "I'm thinking it might be time to have an honest conversation with them. In person. Not tomorrow, but maybe next month on our terms." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, concern in her eyes. "You know they'll try to manipulate the situation." "I'm sure," I said, feeling more certain as the idea took shape. "They've spent my entire life making me feel that I wasn't enough. Now they're suddenly interested because they think I have something they want. I need to address this directly, not for revenge, but for closure." Sarah took my hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But what exactly are you planning?" That night we stayed up late developing what Sarah jokingly called Operation Family Values. It wasn't about punishing my parents or flaunting success. It was about establishing boundaries, speaking truths that had gone unspoken for decades, and perhaps, if possible, laying groundwork for a healthier relationship moving forward. The next morning I called my mother back. "We've checked our calendar," I said. "Sarah and I can fly in 3 weeks from Saturday. Would that work for a family dinner? Her enthusiasm was immediate and telling. Absolutely, I'll tell your father right away. He'll be delighted. And Amanda too, of course. Great, I replied. And Mom Sarah is pregnant. We weren't planning to announce it yet, but since we'll be seeing everyone, I wanted you to know. The news of their impending grandchild should have been the highlight of the conversation. Instead, after a brief congratulations, my mother returned to questions about our travel plans and whether we'd be staying in a hotel or with them. A hotel, I said firmly. We value our space. After hanging up, I emailed my travel assistant to book flights and accommodations. Then I called Jason. Remember when we talked at my wedding about the conversation I should eventually have with my parents? I asked when he answered. It's time. It's time. I need your help thinking through exactly what I want to say. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah and I prepared carefully for the trip to Chicago. We discussed every possible scenario and reaction. I drafted and redrafted what I wanted to communicate with input from both Sarah and my therapist, whom I'd been seeing since shortly after our wedding. The goal isn't to hurt them, my therapist reminded me during our session before the trip. It's to be honest about your experience and establish healthy boundaries going forward. The night before our flight, Sarah held me close in bed. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that you have a real family now. Me, this baby, our friends who love us authentically. Nothing your parents say or do can change that. With her words in my heart, I felt ready to face whatever awaited us in Chicago. The flight from Seattle to Chicago gave me time to reflect on the journey that had brought me to this moment. As the landscape below shifted from mountains to plains, I reviewed my notes one last time, then closed my notebook and turned to Sarah. Ready for the performance of a lifetime, I asked, only half joking. She squeezed my hand. Just be yourself. That's always been enough. We checked into our downtown hotel before driving a rental car to Highland Park. The familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood felt smaller somehow, the impressive homes less intimidating than I remembered. When we pulled into my parents' circular driveway, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of the truth Sarah had helped me understand. Their approval had never been the measure of my worth. My mother opened the door before we reached it, dressed impeccably, as always, in a cashmere sweater and pearls. Her smile was wide, but didn't quite reach her eyes. Dudley and Sarah. How wonderful to see you both, she exclaimed, air kissing my cheek and giving Sarah a brief, awkward hug. Come in, come in. Everyone's in the living room. The house was exactly as I remembered. Tastefully decorated, immaculately clean, and devoid of any real personality. Family photos on the mantel had been updated to include Amanda's medical school graduation, but there were no pictures from my wedding or adult life. My father and sister rose as we entered the living room. Dad gave me a firm handshake and nodded at Sarah. The famous Sarah, he said with a smile that felt rehearsed. We've heard so much about you. It was a blatant lie. They had shown no interest in hearing about her for 3 years. But Sarah played along graciously. All good things, I hope, she replied with a warm smile. It's nice to finally meet you both. Amanda gave me a genuine hug and whispered, Missed you, bro, before greeting Sarah with friendly interest. Of everyone in my family, my sister had made the most effort to maintain our relationship, calling occasionally and sending birthday cards. Drinks. My mother offered, already moving toward the bar cart. Dudley, your usual scotch. And Sarah, what would you like? Wine, a cocktail. Just water for me, thank you, Sarah said, subtly, touching her stomach. My mother's eyes followed the gesture, and her smile brightened. Oh yes, Dudley mentioned your news. A baby, how wonderful. When are you due? November, Sarah answered, accepting the water glass. We're very excited. November, my mother repeated. Perfect timing for holiday photos. Have you thought about names? Family names are always so meaningful. The small talk continued through drinks and into dinner, carefully orchestrated by my parents to maintain an illusion of normal family relationships. They asked surface-level questions about Seattle and Sarah's nursing career, sharing nothing substantial about their own lives beyond professional achievements and social engagements. It wasn't until dessert was served that my father cleared his throat meaningfully. So Dudley, he began setting down his fork. That's quite a car you've got yourself. Tesla Plaid right, top of the line. And there it was, the real purpose of this reunion. Yes, I replied simply. It's a great car. Must have set you back, he continued. 140, 150. 140, I confirmed. He nodded approvingly. Impressive. Very impressive. Your design business must be doing remarkably well. It is, I agreed. We've built a strong reputation in the tech sector. My mother jumped in, her voice casual but her eyes intent. Dudley has always been so creative. We always knew he'd find success eventually, didn't we, Richard? My father nodded. Of course. Though I admit I had my doubts about the art school route. Clearly I was wrong. The admission should have felt validating, but the transparent insincerity made it hollow. They weren't acknowledging my path. They were recalculating my value based on perceived financial success. Actually, my mother continued, your father and I have been discussing family investments recently. With Amanda finishing her residency and you clearly doing well, we thought it might be nice to pool some resources. Perhaps a family vacation property. Something we could all enjoy. I exchanged a glance with Sarah, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod. It was time. Before we discuss investments, I said carefully, I'd like to clear something up. My success isn't eventual. It's been building steadily for years, during which you showed very little interest. My mother's smile froze. That's not true, Dudley. We've always supported you. Have you, I asked, keeping my voice level. You didn't attend my wedding. You've never visited my home or office in Seattle. You've made no effort to know my wife until now. What changed? The question hung in the air. Amanda looked down at her plate, uncomfortable but unsurprised. My father straightened, his expression hardening. If you're implying something, just say it, he challenged. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You and Mom have conditionally approved of me my entire life based on whether I was meeting your specific definition of success. When I chose art school over business school, you reduced financial support. When I built my career in design rather than law or finance, you treated it as a hobby. When I married Sarah, you couldn't be bothered to attend. But now that you've seen evidence of financial success, suddenly you're interested in family investments. My mother's face flushed. That's unfair, Dudley. We've always wanted what's best for you. What you thought was best for me, I corrected gently. Not what actually made me happy or fulfilled. We gave you everything, my father interjected, anger edging his voice. Private schools, opportunities, connections. If we pushed you, it was to help you succeed. And I have succeeded, I replied. Just not in the way you prescribed. That's what I've come to understand. Success isn't a single definition. It's different for everyone. I took Sarah's hand before continuing. The Tesla you're so impressed by, it represents less than 4% of our net worth. Yes, I've done well financially. One of my clients went public, and my stock options were significant. But that's not why I consider myself successful. My parents exchanged startled glances at the mention of my net worth, but I pressed on. I'm successful because I've built a life based on authenticity and meaningful connections. I have a career I'm passionate about, a marriage built on mutual respect and love, and friends who value me for who I am, not what I have. That's real success, and it's something money can't buy. The room fell silent. My father looked as though he was calculating numbers in his head, while my mother seemed caught between indignation and recalibration. I brought something for you. I continued, reaching into my jacket pocket. I withdrew an envelope and placed it on the table. This is the surprise I planned. My mother reached for it eagerly, but I kept my hand on the envelope. It's not what you think, I cautioned. It's documentation of a trust fund I've established for my child, your grandchild. It's structured with a specific purpose to provide educational opportunities and security, while ensuring money never becomes a measure of worth in their life. There's a letter explaining the values that will guide how these funds are used, emphasizing that a person's value comes from character, not wealth or status. I slid the envelope across the table. You're listed as contingent beneficiaries, which means you'll have no control over the funds but will receive statements. I wanted you to see this because it represents how I intend to break the cycle, to raise a child who never questions if they're enough. My mother opened the envelope with trembling hands, scanning the documents inside. My father leaned over to look, his expression unreadable. "There's something else I want to share," I said, my voice softening. "Sarah and I have established a scholarship at RISD for students from families who don't support their artistic pursuits. It provides not just tuition, but mentorship and emotional support. It's named after Professor Jackson, the teacher who believed in me when you didn't." Amanda looked up at this, her eyes meeting mine with new understanding. My sister had always fit our parents' mold more naturally than I had, but I suspected she had her own stories of conditional acceptance. "We didn't come here to shame you or seek revenge," I continued, including all of them in my gaze. "We came because healthy relationships require honesty. I would like to have a relationship with you, all of you, but it needs to be based on who we actually are, not who you wish we were or what you think we can provide." Sarah squeezed my hand supportively as I concluded. "Our child deserves to know their grandparents, but they deserve grandparents who value them unconditionally, who see them as more than an extension of success or status. The question is whether you're interested in being those grandparents." The silence that followed felt enormous. My father was the first to speak, his voice lacking its usual authority. "You've clearly given this a lot of thought," he said slowly, "and perhaps your mother and I have some reflection to do." It wasn't an apology or even a direct acknowledgement, but from my father it was unprecedented. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "Dudley the First, we never meant to make you feel insufficient. We pushed because we wanted security for you." "I know," I said gently, "but there are many kinds of security. Financial security without emotional security isn't enough." Amanda surprised me by speaking up. "He's right," she said quietly. "We've always focused so much on achievement and appearance. Maybe it's time we learn to value connection too." We didn't resolve everything that night. Decades of patterns don't change in a single conversation. But as Sarah and I prepared to leave, there was a subtle shift in the air between us all. My mother hugged me goodbye, a real hug this time, not the perfunctory gesture she'd given me upon arrival. "Will you send ultrasound pictures when you have them?" she asked Sarah. "Of course," Sarah replied. "And maybe you could visit us in Seattle before the baby arrives. See our home, my hospital, Dudley's office." The invitation hung there, a bridge extended. After a moment's hesitation, my mother nodded. "I'd like that." We both would. As we drove back to our hotel, Sarah rested her head on my shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You spoke your truth." "We did it," I corrected. "I couldn't have found that truth without you showing me what real family looks like." The next morning, as we boarded our flight back to Seattle, I received a text from Amanda. "Proud of you. They're really thinking about what you said. Talk soon." It was a small thing, but it felt like the beginning of something new. 6 months later, my parents did visit Seattle. The reunion was sometimes awkward, occasionally tense, but fundamentally different from our previous interactions. They toured my agency offices, visibly impressed by the work displayed and the respect my team showed me. They spent time with Sarah's family, who had flown in from Oregon for a baby shower. Most importantly, they listened more than they spoke, observing the life we had built with new eyes. As Sarah's due date approached, my mother called weekly, her interest in her grandchild seeming genuine rather than performative. My father sent books on Seattle's history and architecture, a subtle acknowledgement of my adopted city's importance in my life. Our daughter was born on a rainy November morning, healthy and perfect, with Sarah's eyes and my chin. We named her Lily Grace, a name with no family connections but full of the beauty and hope she represented to us. When my parents arrived to meet her, something had shifted in them. My father held her with tender awkwardness, his usual confidence replaced by wonder. My mother helped Sarah with midnight feedings, sharing stories from my own infancy with newfound warmth. "She's magnificent," my mother whispered one evening as we watched Lily sleeping. "And so is the family you've created, Dudley." It wasn't a direct apology for the past, but it was an acknowledgement of the present, and that was somewhere to start. Our relationship continues to evolve. There are still moments of tension when old patterns emerge, but there are also new connections forming. My parents are learning slowly that love is not measured by achievement or status, but by presence and acceptance. And I am learning that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. It requires moving forward with clear eyes and open hearts, creating new stories that honor truth while allowing for growth. The Tesla still sits in our driveway, a beautiful machine that inadvertently catalyzed an overdue conversation. But the real luxury in my life has nothing to do with its price tag. It's the authentic connections that fill our home. With Sarah, with Lily, with friends who have become family, and perhaps in time with the parents who are finally learning to see me as I am. If you've stayed with me through this story, maybe you've recognized parts of your own family dynamics within it. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with loved ones who couldn't see your true worth, or found yourself measuring success by someone else's definition rather than your own? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' expectations. Remember, building the life that's right for you is the greatest success of all. Thank you for listening, and until next time, be proud of your journey, whatever path it takes.